The millionaire froze, his eyes locked on the portrait hanging on the wall. The boy in the painting looked exactly like his brother, the brother who vanished more than 30 years ago. And then, the maid's trembling voice broke the silence. "Sir, that boy lived with me in the orphanage until he was 14. Arthur Meneses felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Arthur Meneses was a man who had everything: wealth, respect, and silence. He had built an empire in real estate, conquered every deal, and sat atop the world. But behind all that success lived a wound that never healed: the loss of his little brother, Lucas. Lucas was only 4 when he was kidnapped. It happened on a bright Sunday morning. Their parents took them to Central Park. A moment of distraction, a laugh, a turn of the head, and Lucas was gone. Helicopters searched the skies, officers combed every corner, and the newspapers printed his small smiling face for weeks. But after months of false leads, the case went cold. Arthur was only 8 then, but he made himself a promise. "One day, I'll find you, Lucas. I swear I will." Years passed. The promise became a shadow that followed him everywhere. In his office meetings, in the clinking of glasses at business dinners, even in the silence of his mansion, where his mother's piano still sat by the window. The photo of Lucas, faded and yellow with time, remained on top of that piano. Then came Clara, a young maid from the countryside. She had started working for Arthur just 2 weeks earlier. Quiet, polite, always with eyes that carried something secret. Arthur barely noticed her until that afternoon. He found her standing frozen in the living room, staring at the portrait of Lucas. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. He frowned. "Clara, are you all right?" She turned, visibly shaken. "Sir, that boy," she whispered. "He lived with me in the orphanage until he was 14. Arthur blinked, not sure if he'd heard right. "What did you just say?" She took a deep breath. "His name was Daniel. That's how I knew him. He told us. He'd been taken from a rich family when he was little. But no one believed him. They thought he made it up." Her voice broke. "I believed him. He was my best friend. He protected me." Arthur's heart pounded so hard he could barely speak. "You're telling me Daniel was my brother?" Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll never forget that face." Arthur felt dizzy. Could it be true? His brother alive? But how could no one have found him after all these years? "Tell me everything," he said. Clara told him what she remembered. Daniel had arrived at the São Vicente orphanage when he was 6. A social worker brought him there after his adoptive parents supposedly died in a car crash. The papers said he was an orphan since birth. But Daniel often told stories that didn't fit. He'd talk about a big house with a piano, a garden, and an older brother who called him "my champion." He drew those things over and over. No one believed him, except Clara. She said Daniel was smart, always drawing, always dreaming. But when he turned 14, he got into a fight at the orphanage and ran away. No one ever saw him again. Arthur's throat tightened. He walked closer to the painting, tracing the brushstrokes of Lucas's face. The same innocent eyes, the same soft hair, the same purity he remembered from childhood. He whispered, "Lucas." That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. For the first time in decades, the ache of his promise burned inside him again. He needed the truth. The next morning, he hired a private investigator. Clara went with him to the old orphanage. The building was falling apart. Cracked walls, broken windows, paint peeling like skin. An elderly nun, Sister Madalena, greeted them. When Arthur showed her the portrait, she gasped and clutched her chest. "My God, Daniel, I remember that boy." Arthur leaned forward. "Do you know where he came from?" She shook her head. "A woman brought him, said she was a social worker. She had papers, a birth certificate. Everything seemed official. She said the parents died, and the boy had no relatives. We didn't question it. There were so many abandoned children back then." Arthur's jaw tightened. The date on Daniel's orphanage record matched exactly the week the police stopped searching for Lucas. His stomach turned. His brother hadn't vanished. He'd been misplaced, forgotten, hidden in plain sight. Sister Madalena's hands trembled as she pulled out an old folder. "Before he ran away," she said. "He left this." Inside was a drawing, a house, a piano, two boys holding hands, and in a child's handwriting, "My name is Lucas Meneses. One day my brother will find me." Arthur broke down. He pressed the drawing to his chest, crying silently. Beside him, Clara sobbed. "He always said that," she whispered. Back at the mansion, Arthur placed the drawing beside the portrait. The resemblance was undeniable. Now there was no more doubt. But one question remained. Where was Lucas now? Arthur hired more investigators. They searched through old hospital files, police reports, missing person databases. Every trail led to another dead end until one name surfaced. Daniel Lucas Meneses, registered at a shelter in another city when he was 17. Found injured by the roadside, no ID, no memory. Arthur's pulse raced. He traveled there with Clara immediately. The shelter director confirmed it. Yes, Daniel had been hospitalized after an accident. He stayed 3 months, then disappeared again. They had one blurred photo in the file. The image was old, but the eyes, those same gentle eyes, stared right through the grain. Arthur felt a mix of hope and heartbreak. He wasn't ready to give up. Weeks later, a late-night call came from one of his investigators. "Sir, we found something. A hospital record from 2012, Belo Horizonte. A man named Daniel Lucas, around 30 years old, admitted with partial amnesia." Arthur and Clara flew out the next morning. At the hospital, an elderly doctor remembered the patient clearly. "He was quiet," the doctor said. "Kind. He didn't know who he was. But he drew beautifully. Always drew children, pianos, gardens." Arthur's breath caught. "Do you still have any of his drawings?" The doctor nodded and opened a drawer. Inside was a yellow folder filled with sketches. Arthur flipped through trembling hands and stopped. There it was again. The same piano, the same two boys, and the same small handwriting. "One day my brother will find me." Clara covered her mouth, crying. "He never forgot," she whispered. The doctor continued. "Before he left, he gave me an address. Said he needed to visit an old orphanage in São Vicente. After that, we never saw him again." Arthur and Clara exchanged looks. They knew where to go. The orphanage was now a ruin, its walls covered in ivy, its halls echoing with ghosts. They entered with flashlights, dust and silence, broken toys, and on one wall drawings. Hundreds of them. Among them one stood out. A house, a piano, two boys, and the words scrawled faintly beneath. "I came back." But no one was waiting. Clara fell to her knees, sobbing. "He was here, Arthur. He came back." Arthur touched the drawing, his fingers trembling. His heart ached with guilt and love all at once. They had been so close and yet so far. Then one final clue emerged. A local investigator found a recent record of an artist who went by the name Lucas Meneses. He painted portraits in small-town markets across the countryside. Arthur and Clara followed the trail to a tiny mountain village. A fair was being held in the town square. Colorful tents, music, laughter. And there, under the afternoon sun, a man was painting a little girl's portrait. Simple clothes, trimmed beard, calm smile. But those eyes Arthur knew by heart. Clara whispered, "It's him." Arthur's breath caught. He took a step forward. The man looked up, startled. His eyes widened. "I know you," he said softly. "From the orphanage." "Clara." Clara nodded, tears streaming down. "Yes, it's me." Arthur stepped closer. "Lucas," he whispered. The man froze. "Lucas?" he repeated, confused. Arthur reached into his coat and pulled out the old drawing. "Did you make this?" The man's hands trembled as he took it. Tears welled up in his eyes. "I used to dream about this house," he whispered. "About a piano, and a brother who promised to find me." Arthur's voice broke. "I never stopped searching." He pulled Lucas into his arms. And in that moment, after 30 years of pain, loss, and waiting, two brothers finally became one again. The crowd around them stopped to watch, not understanding the story, but feeling the emotion that filled the air. Clara stood by, crying and smiling all at once. The promise had been kept. In the weeks that followed, Lucas went through therapy. Doctors confirmed he had partial amnesia from the old accident. But slowly, pieces returned. The smell of his mother's perfume, the sound of the piano, the laughter in their garden. When Arthur brought him back to the mansion, Lucas walked through each hallway as if stepping inside a memory. He stopped by the piano, touched its keys, and whispered, "I thought you'd forgotten me." Arthur smiled through tears. "Never. I looked for you my whole life." Clara joined them quietly. "He waited for you in every drawing," she said softly. Lucas smiled faintly. For the first time, peace began to settle in his heart. One evening, Arthur opened an old wooden box. Inside was a letter from their late mother. It read, "If fate ever brings Lucas home, tell him the piano still waits, because love never forgets." Arthur handed the letter to Lucas. He read it, tears falling silently, then looked at his brother. "Mom used to play Chopin," he said. Arthur nodded. "She said every note was a prayer." Lucas sat at the piano. Arthur joined him, two grown men side by side, playing the melody their mother once played. For the first time in 30 years, the mansion filled with music again. And somewhere deep inside, the boy from the drawing finally found his way home. But Arthur wasn't done. He launched a foundation named after their mother, the Manessa's Hope Foundation, to reunite missing children with their families and support orphanages across the country. Clara became its coordinator. Lucas designed its logo, two boys holding hands before a piano. At the grand opening, reporters filled the hall. Arthur took the stage, his voice steady but emotional. "This story began with a promise," he said. "A brother who vowed to find another, and a kind woman who refused to forget. Today, that promise becomes hope for every lost child." Lucas embraced him in front of everyone. "Love found us, Arthur," he said softly. "Even after all these years." Clara wiped her tears, glancing at the old portrait now hanging proudly in the hall. This time, the boy in the picture didn't look sad anymore. He looked home, because time may erase faces, but it can never erase love that refuses to forget. If the story touched your heart, leave a like, share it, and remember, some promises are stronger than time.